following the position taken by governors on the issue of direct primaries, which was made compulsory by the National Assembly, and the decision of the President to withhold his assent to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, lawmakers are dissatisfied. They insist that direct primaries will loosen the hold and control of governors on political parties. In reacting to the refusal of the President to assent to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, members of the Senate are considering overriding President Buhari.
Why will Mr. President say he doesn't want direct primary? The country is not its own limited liability company. This is a country, and this is a chamber. So the Senate ought to override him. By the law, we have the power to override him. That was what Section 58, 4 and 5 said. So if the Constitution gives us the provision to do so, we use our powers to do it.
So we're seeing people compiling signatures inside the Senate chamber.
Yes. We've got more than 73% required to override the veto.
Does it cross across party lines?
Yes, every person.
I felt the National Assembly, which I am part of it, sent him a bill, which I participated in the drafting, going through the first reading, second reading, third reading of that same bill. So I feel that it's wrong, very wrong. Thank you.
Meanwhile, lawmakers in the House of Representatives do not appear to be considering the option of overriding the President as they await the direction of the House leadership.
Whether we say direct primary or indirect primary, it doesn't count. What counts is how best can a candidate emerge. And the electorate will say, this is the person we want.
You see, the speech of the Speaker said that we should make sure that we leave everything until when we come back. By the time we come back, today is the last day of our plenary. So by the time we come back, at least we'll be able to know. But we have the chance, and at the same time, as a legislator, you can override certain. When we come back, I think we know what to do.
Nigerians also await the final action from lawmakers following agitations that direct primary system would improve participation in internal party politics.
Well, the conversation does continue indeed, and we're now being joined by Samson Itodo, who is the Executive Director of Yaga Africa. We also have a few guests who are going to be joining us virtually. I'm sure that when they're ready, we'll certainly introduce them as we go along in this. Oh, yes, they are ready already. We have Professor Wahab Egbewole, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria. He joins us via Zoom from Ilorin, and we also have Dr. Ngozi Wogugu, who is an associate professor of political science, head Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Babcock University in Ogun State. Gentlemen, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Well, Samson, let me start with you. I don't know if this came as a surprise for you, the President withholding his assent to this Electoral Act Amendment Bill. Did it hit you as a surprise?
Well, it hit me and also the civil society community as a surprise. For three reasons. First, here is a president who committed to, assenting to a legislation that enjoys popular support from Nigerians. Secondly, this process enjoyed, the engagement and the participation, the full participation of the Ministry of Justice. And so we thought that, all the gray areas were addressed before the bill was transmitted to the president for assent. And lastly, was just that sense of urgency, because we're actually in a national election emergency. You'd expect that, given the context that we have, the president would accelerate his assent. But it's disappointing that for a fifth record time under his administration, he's declining assent to the electoral bill. And it does put to question his commitment to bequeathing to Nigerians an electoral law that guarantees the independence of democratic institutions the participation of citizens as well as the integrity of the vote. It's so sad that he has declined assent, and some of the reasons that he gave are quite inexcusable. And we just hope that the National Assembly, as civil society has demanded, to either override the president or review the contentious provision and transmit the bill back to the president to assent to the bill, because his decline has grave implications, and it will adversely affect the upcoming elections, both at the FCT in Osun as well as the Ekiti governorship election and the 2023 elections. Now, we're just 425 days to the 2023 elections. If you look at the review timelines in the electoral bill, party primaries, in fact, in February, INEC is supposed to issue notice of elections. That's 360 days before the election. So you have early activities that will be conducted in the build-up to 2023. If at December, and this, like the National Assembly said, they'll reopen this discussion in January. If by January, when January 4th is the commencement date for party primaries for Ekiti, what we have is some uncertainty that should have been avoided. And we're just back to the 2018 scenario where there was uncertainty with the legal framework. It impacted on INEC's preparations because the guidelines and the manuals devolved from the electoral bill. And so we are currently in a very difficult situation, and this was avoidable. All the president would have done was to assent to the bill and then send an amendment bill, to the National Assembly for consideration. That way, it gives INEC and stakeholders the opportunity to test some of the innovations that have been introduced in the current electoral bill.
You don't really need the bill to test that, because some people will say that Anambra has already happened and the BVAS was implemented, was experimented with, and they didn't need the Electoral Act to do that, did they? No,
they need the Electoral Act, because if you look at the position of the law as at today, first, if you look at in Wike and Peter side, if you look at the Akwa Ibom, Udoma and Umana, the Supreme Court has held that you cannot supplant, the voters register with the list of accredited voters in an election. And what the National Assembly did, in fact, their lordships actually advised the National Assembly and INEC to review the provisions of the Electoral Act that legitimizes electronic accreditation of voters. And in furtherance of that directive or call, in the current bill, electronic accreditation of voters was legitimized. Because if INEC proceeds with deploying the BVAS, and when the debate or the contest is on determining overvoting, the current position of the law is that overvoting will be determined based on the total number of votes versus the total number of registered voters. But the bill has cured that mischief, that the overvoting will be determined based on the total number of votes cast and the total number of accredited voters. If you look at electronic transmission of results, INEC has said they've piloted electronic transmission of results, since the 2011 elections. INEC is currently deploying the IREV, the voter election results viewing portal for reviewing results. Now, if the bill had been passed, right, and the president assented to the bill, in the FCT municipal elections, INEC can now deploy electronic transmission of results to test that system before the Ekiti and Osun governorship elections. But what INEC is currently doing does not have the force of law. And that's why it was important and very crucial for the president to have assented to the legislation without these controversies that we're currently experiencing in the polity.
Let's quickly go to our guests who are joining us virtually. Let me ask you, Professor Ngozi, how did this president's refusal to assent to the bill, how did it come to you?
Okay, thank you very much. It is true that the general expectation was that the president would assent to the bill. But given the body language and the advice of the Attorney General, we knew where we were going, that the president was not going to assent to the bill. So it actually didn't come as a surprise to me that the president did not assent to the bill.
Oh, you must forgive me. I lost you for most of that conversation. I could barely hear you. But I'm hoping that our guests at home were able to hear you. Let me ask Professor Egbewale what he made of the president's withholding his assent to the bill.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate this opportunity. The president's prerogative is defined by the law. It is a choice that he had to make, and he made that choice clearly in terms of he had a duty to either assent or decline, and he has chosen to decline. As far as I'm concerned, legally, that is his prerogative. But it doesn't end there. And that is why, that's the beauty of law. The process leading to the passage of this bill clearly shows where the Nigerian populace reside. And if the president of Nigeria decides that, oh, as far as I'm concerned, National Assembly has done its own, I am doing my own. It is his legal right to do. It is also the right of the National Assembly to take further steps if they so decide. So for me, the president's right has been exercised. The National Assembly has a right to exercise its own right, and the Nigerian people also have a right to exercise their right.
Well, there'll be questions as to what the right of the Nigerian people is on this one, at least at this stage where it currently stands. But the question is, reading the president's reasons, which he gave for not assenting to the bill, what do you make of it?
Lawmaking is a process, and all the issues. And it's important that the president, even in his letter, said, at the moment. So in my view, I think the president appreciates the fact that that decision may still be changed. And the right of Nigerians now, in my view, is as the electorate that gave their mandate to the National Assembly can then mandate them at their individual constituencies. Because ordinarily, before the law was passed in the first place, there should have been consultations by every member of the National Assembly at the various constituencies. And if the constituencies are giving them the mandate, go and pass that bill, it is only reasonable that the president respects that position. And that is what I'm talking about with regards to the right of the Nigerian people. Go back to the constituencies and let them revalidate whatever mandate they have given. Oh, the president has declined assent, therefore leave it at that. The president has declined assent, no, don't allow that to stay. That's the right of Nigeria.
Okay. Well, we'll wait to see how that right is expressed, but we'll also be taking more opinions when we come back from this break. Please stay with us.
Thanks for staying with us. Let me begin this part with Mr. Itodo in our Abuja studio. Well, something you said earlier struck me, and I don't know if you want to throw some more light on it. You said that in the process of making the bill into what it became before being sent to the president, the Ministry of Justice, and I assume that's the Federal Ministry of Justice, participated fully in the process, and it's also from the same Ministry of Justice, the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, that the President sought counsel before signing before he would make up his mind whether or not to sign the bill into law. And of course, we all know what came from the Attorney General's desk. So I'm just wondering, was there a disconnect somewhere? Is there some hypocrisy, or is it just sheer politics?
I think your last point explains it. What we're experiencing is what we call in public policy parlance, policy capture. There are partisan political interests that have captured this entire process and want to shift, the content of this bill away from advancing public interest to focused on advancing partisan and individual interests of the people. The Ministry of Justice was part of this, and we have said this repeatedly, that the difference between this amendment process undertaken by the 9th National Assembly and the previous efforts both in the 7th and the 8th National Assembly was the joint and collaborative approach that the leadership of both committees in the Senate and the House of Reps adopted. You recall, there were technical committees that were constituted by the National Assembly that comprised of the Ministry of Justice and the Attorney General, the Senate, the House, civil society, and INEC. And the INEC chairman and top leadership of INEC, they were all part of several retreats and meetings that was conducted. So it raises question as to, first, even the integrity and the sincerity of purpose in the participation in this entire process. And what you have seen is just a deviation, from public interest just to advance, partisan political interest. And it's unfortunate. And when I read the reports on where the Attorney General stands and his advice to the President, it's just sheer politics. And I had hoped that, as public leaders, they will, prioritize what's the interest of our electoral process. They would recognize that we are in an emergency situation and the electoral law needs to be finalized, because we cannot conduct subsequent elections with the current electoral law that we have. It's not only obsolete, but it will not guarantee the integrity, of subsequent elections. So we thought that, that would be the overriding and perhaps the top interest and priorities of our political leaders. But it's clear that they're not really interested in reforming the process based on this action. And we hope and urge them that within the next 30 days, this process should be completed. If it's not concluded, then it's going to jeopardize the integrity of the Ekiti Osun as well as the 2023 elections.
Well, so many things to unpack in that letter of Mr. President, but let me take it to some of our other guests. Well, Professor Igbole, we picked up like at least six points, 6 reasons adduced by the President for not assenting to that. And I'm just wondering what for you would be the far-reaching implications. Take, for instance, the part where he talked about existing party constitutions, and I'm sure that will come on screen shortly. So I'm wondering, for instance, he said that the proposed amendment cannot work in retrospect, given that the existing constitution of the parties already registered with INEC permit direct, indirect, and consensus primaries. So the question that came to me from that is, which one should really take preeminence? Which one should kowtow to which? The law of the country or the constitution of the political parties?
Thank you. It's obvious that from what Samson said, that politics overrode policy. And for me, priority of laws had already been settled since 1981 or thereabout in Balogun's case, that it starts from the Constitution, the statute. In fact, the party constitution has no place at all.
Well, Prof, if you don't mind, just 1 second. If your speaker is on, could you turn down the volume of the speaker from your side so that we can hear you distinctly? Please go ahead.
Sorry. the point I was making, I hope I'm a bit clearer now.
Well, you're a bit clearer now. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. The point I was making was that party politics has no business in, a party constitution has no place in the hierarchy of laws in Nigeria. And the essence of the Electoral Act is to actually override the totality of such a decision. I'm sorry. I hope you are hearing me.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. So the party constitution has no place in the hierarchy of laws in Nigeria. And the other reasons are, well, as far as the president of Nigeria is concerned, may have information that we do not have. But I'm looking at it from purely legal perspective, talking about security. That is why the government is put in place in the first place. 2, talking about legal. What's legal?
We'll come to those other. We'll come to those other reasons, Prof. I just wanted to take that point from you about whether or not the constitutions of each of the political parties, which already has the provision, which lines up with the provisions of the current Electoral Act of direct and indirect primaries, should take precedence over the nation adjusting or not its own electoral law. Let me ask the same question of Associate Professor Ngozi Nwokwu. What's your take on that? Do you agree that the party constitution should adjust to the Electoral Act, or the other way around?
Okay, thank you very much, Ayo. I agree that it should be the party constitution that should be adjusted to meet with the extant laws of the land. The electoral law is the umbrella law for conducting elections in Nigeria. So parties should now make their constitutions to comply with the provisions of the electoral law. So I think it is abnormal to decline assent on the basis of the provisions of the constitutions of the political parties. It would have been better to make amendment to the electoral law. Then the political parties will now have to meet and amend their constitutions to meet up with the new provisions that are in the Electoral Act. That should have been the best thing to do.
That consideration was not made by the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation or the people that the president said he consulted with?
Okay, like Samson said, we see a lot of politics playing out in this whole process. Okay, it's not as if people don't know what should be in the national interest, but people are also looking at what will play out going forward to the next elections, which one will be in their best interest or not. So the president consulted widely, as we had Premier Additional say, and the advice that people gave will be based on their personal idiosyncrasies and the interest that they have. So when you look at it, sometimes it's not just the interest of the people that everybody is looking at. Some people are thinking at what is in it for them. What will happen when they are in position to emerge as candidates of the party? Which one will be more favorable for them? So those things are the things that play out, both in the part of the advice that is given by the Attorney General or those that the President consulted.
But then, for you, my sincere apologies, what then does that say to you of the process of lawmaking if more than 400, almost 500 lawmakers sat down, held public hearings, and had, of course, themselves wide consultations far and wide across all levels of political divides, considerations, and all. Perhaps the same quality, caliber of or groups of people that the president consulted with, and they all came to the different positions that they've come to. What then does that say to you of that process of lawmaking?
Okay. It's not just it's the dynamics of the process, actually. Now, the thing is this. If this thing were to play out the way everybody wanted it to play out, the next thing would have been for the National Assembly to go back and override the president's assent and pass the law to give credence to that idea of wide consultations. But we know it's not going to happen. You know, Mr. Femi Adesina also alluded to that. There will be party consultations and all that. The process is, as it is, it's facilitated by human actors, and several things play out within that process. So there is no process that is perfect, actually. People will change ground, okay? And you know, the other angle to it is that this thing is the position that is favorable to the legislators on one hand, and the position that is favorable to the governors. That's what's in the public domain, as per who controls the political parties and emergence of candidates. So if it is favorable for the legislators, they will come out with it, okay? In this case, that's what it's doing. But in the end, it's not going to go the long haul where you have the legislators overriding the president. We can know that there will be consultations. Hopefully, there will be some adjustments, and then by the National Assembly, and the bill will never be assented to by the president. They just hope that plays out very quickly enough. It's not too bad for our system, but when you also look back, you ask yourself, the legislators, do they usually consult with the constituents in the processes of amendment of laws and all that? Because there are some other provisions in this electoral bill that are not being debated now that are contentious. Why everybody is debating this is because the president gave his reason for not granting assent on the direct primaries. He didn't raise any other issue.
Well, Mr. Itodo, again, as I said, there are so many things to unpack in this. But as I said, let's also take a further look at some of those reasons given by the president. One of them is financial crimes. And let me ask you this, Mr. Itodo. Is this, for you, on the screen, a strong enough or not reason for the president to have dissented his signature, disagreed to sign it? Is this financial crimes issue a reason or not, in your own opinion? Because, I mean, you know, we've been talking about vote buying and all of that for quite a long time. And according to the president, this could make matters only worse over monetization of the process.
You know, it's interesting to hear the president actually allude to this menace that's bedeviled our electoral process for quite a long time. And you're very aware, and we've had this discussion about vote buying, and it's interesting to see the president flagging this. The current political process is already commercialized. I don't consider this, excuse me, I don't consider this a very strong reason for declining assent. In any case, the response would have been, you know, to say, how do we limit the impact of money politics in our electoral process, is to look at campaign spending. So if his concern was around monetization, then I think the discourse should be, how do we implement campaign spending limits imposed in our electoral law? How do we ensure that parties are restrained from pegging high cost of nomination fees and sundry fees paid by political or aspirants? Those are ways that you decommercialize the process. How do you also, you know, reduce this parasite of office that is the major attraction for political office by politicians? So there are other ways. So I don't see this as a cogent reason for declining assent to the legislation. In any case, it's the political class, the political actors that compromise, the integrity of the process, weaponize poverty, and try to buy votes from citizens, and also try to secure party nomination at all costs. We know for sure what happens during party primaries, and whether direct or indirect, these processes are still prone to manipulation, where hegemons within political parties would deploy huge resources to compromise the choice that either party members or voters at those primaries will make in the course of candidate nomination. So it's not a cogent reason. If the president is concerned about financial crimes, if he's concerned about vote buying, he would have championed this from the 2019 general elections. And part of the inputs that they would have made in the review process is to see how we strengthen our campaign spending regulations, or even prevail on the EFCC and ICPC. These two agencies have been involved in election monitoring or election observation in recent past. The key question is, how many people have been prosecuted for vote buying? How many people have been prosecuted for spending beyond the limits pegged by our laws? And it's on record that even the president's party, the opposition party, they've been complicit in infringing on campaign spending limitations. So I think it's just double standards, and perhaps the president was just shopping for reasons to justify his decline, and I think this is not cogent enough.
Professor Egbowale, what do you think?
I also subscribe to the position that the reason is not too cogent. And my position is informed by the fact that when we are talking about money, there are legitimate spendings in every political process. And the fact that people are coming from their houses to vote in respect of the party primaries is not going to, in my view, increase the spending in any form worse than the indirect primaries position. And I am of this view because the spendings is expected to be for basics and not for vote buying. And secondly, if we talk about monetization, over monetization, it is also the duty of the state to ensure that this law is properly implemented, irrespective of the dynamics that Mr. Itodo had identified. As far as I'm concerned, when we make a law, and especially a law of this magnitude, and the circumstances under which the law was passed in the first place, there is no reason for this tangential rationale that the president had raised in terms of over monetization. Politics is expensive everywhere in the world. Now, the only difference in Nigeria is the vote buying aspect. And of course, that is a crime which the state has a duty to curb by all means. So it has nothing to do with basis for rejecting to assent to a fundamental bill of this nature that will spell doom for our prospective elections.
Reason on security, the reason of security that he gave, that the security agencies themselves could be overstretched if they have to stretch themselves to 8,809 wards all over the nation.
Thank you. I also believe that is neither here nor there, because it is more about 10 times 8,800 and something wards that the general elections are held, and the security still do their best to make provisions for it. Secondly, we also must appreciate the fact that we are talking about party primaries, and they are supposed to be members of a particular party. Expectation is that they are members of the same family, and we are not looking at hoodlums. It is just the peculiarity of our own political process that is informing the president's raking these issues. With due respect to Mr. President, I don't think that I expect that each political party will provide security for its members. And members of the political parties are actually their own security in the different worlds that these party primaries are expected to have taken place. To now use that as, they will be overstretched. No. In my humble view, partisan politics is a voluntary freedom of association. They have decided on their own, I want to belong to a particular party. Therefore, why should they now stretch or stress the security to have their own primary to elect who they intend to elect? Well, with due respect, I think I have my own reservation for that kind of business.
All right, let me ask Professor Wogugu, given the reasons that you have seen in that letter of Mr. President to the National Assembly, does it in any way question the internal politics of each of these political parties as far as you're concerned?
Okay, thank you very much. It does. It does, really. It's an open knowledge that most of our parties have problems with internal democracy. And part of the reasons that the president has given also speaks to that acknowledgement. Okay, even though those reasons may not be said to be genuine enough to decline assent, but they speak to the way our politics is being run within the party mechanism, within the general system. We have challenges, and that boils down to the fact that our political process is too monetized and is attractive to people, and politics is seen as an easy way to make wealth. So people want to go into it, and they are prepared to do anything to get into public office because they will have direct access to state resources. That's what all this is about. If people were seeing politics as service to the nation, where you go and then you come out poorer than when you went in, then we won't have too many people, we won't have the challenges that we are having. It's just the nature of our political system that is at the root of all these issues that we are having. And that system needs to be completely reformed. That system needs to be completely reformed.
All right, well, just one last one, Mr. Samson Itodo in our Abuja studio. If 24 hours is such a long time in politics, for you, how significant is it that legislators will deliberate on this issue when they resume in January?
I think it's significant. They've got two options. First, is to override the president, and secondly, is to resolve and remove the contentious clause. But they have to do so within the next 30 days, because as I mentioned earlier, we are in a national election emergency. With this law, this process needs to be concluded to ensure early preparations for the 2023 election. So I expect that upon resumption, that should be the first issue that will be considered. If they take the route of overriding the president, which I think they should, then they should do that on the day they resume. If they take the route of reviewing the provision, it doesn't take anything. It's just, amending that particular clause, and they pass it and transmit same to the president. And the president should, assent to the bill in 1 week. This is in the interest of our democracy, and anything short of this will be a repudiation of national interest.
Okay. Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yaga Africa. Ngozi Wogugu, Associate Professor of Political Science, as well as Professor Wahab Igbewale, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of our program this morning.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Thank you very much, Aya. Thank you.
Yeah. Still on the matter, another perspective, same issue, when we return. To stay with us.